Right now to have Chief Acevedo join us. He is coming to us from Houston. Welcome to the program, Chief. Let me just ask you your reaction today. The family of George Floyd is calling for an end to looting, for an end to violence, but to continue protests until there is justice and until all the officers involved are quote unquote locked up. I just want to know from your perspective as a law enforcement what your reaction to that.
Well, first, I wanted to say that I extend my deepest condolences to the Floyd family. I've been able to speak with some of the family members here in Houston, and, you know, it's representative of what Houston's about. Houston's been faring so much better because we have people like the Floyd family. We're a community of faith. We're a richly diverse community, the most diverse community in this nation. And I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for showing people, for showing the world that in Houston, the melting pot of America, we do things differently, which sends a message to those that may want to hijack the memory of George Floyd. Don't come to Houston trying that nonsense, because the police stand with the community and the community stand with the police, and we're a department homegrown that reflects this richly diverse community. So God bless them.
Chief Acevedo, I hear you loud and clear, and you're absolutely right. In their grief, they are doing the right thing and asking for calm and peaceful protest. But I want to ask you, you created quite a stir over the weekend because you went out into your very diverse community and you tried to calm the people, and you had some harsh words for the kind of law enforcement that we saw, which led to the death of George Floyd. Tell me where you stand on this. Explain to us about a little bit of, about the speech you made that went so viral.
You know, let's be real clear. I want to make it real clear. The vast majority of police officers in this country, 800,000 of them, 18,000 police departments, do a phenomenal job. They serve 25, 30, 35, 40 years. They never shoot at anybody. They never hurt anybody. They serve with honor, distinction, and courage. But we still live in a country where we make too many excuses and tolerate mediocrity and tolerate police abuse. There is no excusing a police officer putting his knee and keeping it on the neck of a man that's handcuffed, calling for mercy and calling for his mama. There is no excuse for that, and there's no excuse for 3 officers sitting there and not intervening as required, not just by policy, not just by law, but by our conscience, if we have one, and by the God that we're supposed to be following. So we stand with the Floyd family. We stand with our community of all colors, all races, all creeds, and we are going to stand with them and march with them until they get justice, because that's what they deserve, and that's what's going to finally bring this kind of stuff not to an end, because the human condition is imperfect and we will always have to deal between good and bad, but it will greatly reduce the potential for this stuff happening.
These are, again, very strong words. We will march until we get justice. You are the police chief of a very diverse city. In fact, I know that it's a majority-minority city. And I want to know why it was important for you. Why was it important for you to go out onto the streets this weekend?
Well, I've been doing this my whole career and been criticized for it, but people forget what the rage that we're seeing is an example of the fact that our greatest force multiplier is police officers in a nation of laws, in a nation where people have rights. We cannot do our jobs if we lose the consent of the people. And what we're seeing is that we will lose the consent of the people if injustices like this, A, continue to happen, but B, when they happen, we don't take the action that needs to be seen. People know really bad policing and criminal policing when they see it. It doesn't require a law degree. It requires just common sense. And so it's important for me to be out there with my community because I live in this community. I care about this community. And my number one hope is that good comes out of George Floyd's death. And secondly, that we're responsible for this community and we're responsible for our protesters, that we continue to have the kind of Houston strong mentality that we have here to keep this big melting pot safe. And I have every intention of joining my community, ensure that nobody comes here and tries to hijack the peace and the love that we have here, despite the anger.
So you have said what happened in Minneapolis to George Floyd and everything that's happening there and around the country is a crucial test of your profession. You've said that. It's a crucial test of our profession in terms of law enforcement. I need to ask you this because some of the latest news is that President Trump, as we know, has had a conference call with governors. And some of that audio has come out and we're using it. He says you're weak. He says many of you should be, not showing this weakness. We're laughing stocks. You need to dominate. You need to dominate. I want to ask you not to, if you don't want to, comment on the President of the United States. But is the right direction for police today in this environment to go out and dominate and to show that they're quote unquote not weak? What should the police be doing now to calm this terrible situation?
Let me just say this to the President of the United States on behalf of the police chiefs in this country. Please, if you don't have something constructive to say, keep your mouth shut, because you're putting men and women in their early 20s at risk. It's not about dominating. It's about winning hearts and minds. And let's be clear. We do not want people to confuse kindness with weakness, but we don't want ignorance to ruin what we've got here in Houston. And speaking for my colleagues across the country, where their officers are being injured, community members are being injured, if you don't have something to say, like Forrest Gump, then don't say it, because that's the basic tenets of leadership, and we need leadership now more than ever. And it hurts me to no end, because whether we vote for someone, we don't vote for someone, it's still our president. But it's time to be presidential and not try to be like you're on The Apprentice. This is not Hollywood. This is real life, and real lives are at risk. And I ask the American people to please join with the police. Stand together. Let's shift this to where it needs to be, to the voting booth. Pay attention to the hearts and of the people that we elect. And the reason this stuff happens is because too many people right now in this country that are throwing bricks and damaging property never bother to vote. So you have a choice. Lift up your voice, be heard in the voting booth, and continue to march peacefully. So the focus remains on bad policing, criminal policing. And let's be real honest, this is not just about policing. It's about society and this disproportionality of the things going on in our country, from education to health to food to everything that we all as human beings hold near and dear. So please, please don't react to that. If we just hug one another, the only thing that will happen to overcome hate is love and engagement. Let's engage and let's do what we can control, which is our own actions, our own hearts, and exercise without fail our right to vote.
Police Chief Acevedo, those are very strong words, and particularly you are a Cuban immigrant. You came when you were 4 years old to the United States, and you are the police chief, the first such in the city of Houston. So I want to ask you lastly, there have been reforms planned, made. For instance, in Minneapolis, the police force did implement training on implicit bias, on mindfulness, de-escalation, crisis intervention. It did diversify the department's leadership. It did create tighter use of force standards. It adopted body cameras. In other words, it did all this stuff, but it did not work. Chief Acevedo, what is it going to take? How much reform? How many of these, playbooks? What is it going to take?
Listen, Christian, that's a great question. And here's my response from my heart. What we're seeing is not just about the death of George Floyd. What we're seeing is a response to not just police brutality. What we're seeing is a response to disproportionality of wealth and everything else in this country. Let's not kid ourselves. Unfortunately, when good policing happens, which happens every day in our country, it doesn't make the news. Tens of millions of contacts every year in very dynamic situations. It doesn't make the news. We're the most visible cog of government, and when we get it wrong, there's no excuse. We can't excuse it. We have to accept it. but don't kid yourself into believing that the rage is just because of what happens with police. It's about society from pre-K education all the way up. So please, let's just keep moving the ball. I promise you that the police chiefs are willing to lead. We need police labor union leaders. It's time for them to either step up and be part of the solution, or we're just going to have to get elected officials to be doing what they need to do, which is to do everything we can to weed out bad cops so we can lift up the very vast majority that are honorable professionals and really deserve our support.
Well, Chief Acevedo, we thank you, and we thank you for leading by example.